The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Canon City, Colorado, as Hannah Bartlett ducked behind a water trough, her heart pounding against her ribcage. It wasn't how she'd planned to arrive in town chased by a gang of bandits who'd attempted to rob the stagecoach she'd been traveling on, but life rarely unfolded according to plan. She clutched her small valise to her chest, the only possession she had left after fleeing St. Louis with nothing but hopes for a fresh start. The year was 1878, and Canon City was experiencing the growing pains of a frontier town caught between its mining past and uncertain future. Hannah had come west on the promise of a teaching position, having exchanged letters with the town council for months. At 22, with both parents recently deceased and no prospects back east, the offer had seemed like divine providence. "Stay down, miss," a deep voice commanded as another shot rang out. Hannah peered over the edge of the trough to see a tall man with a Stetson pulled low over his eyes, returning fire at the bandits who were retreating down the main street. His movements were fluid, practiced, as he reloaded his revolver with remarkable speed. Within moments, the bandits had disappeared around a corner, and the street fell silent except for the murmurs of onlookers emerging from the safety of nearby buildings. The man who had come to her aid holstered his weapon and approached. "Are you hurt?" he asked, extending a calloused hand. "No, thank you," Hannah replied, accepting his help to stand. "You saved my life, Mr. Preston Xavier," he said, removing his hat to reveal sandy brown hair and eyes the color of the Colorado sky. "Town deputy. Those were the Sutton boys been causing trouble all through the territory." Hannah brushed dust from her travel-worn skirt. "Hannah Bartlett. I've come to take up the teaching position." Something flashed across Preston's face, recognition, perhaps concern. "Miss Bartlett, the council's been expecting you." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "There's been some discussion about your appointment." "Discussion?" Hannah felt her stomach tighten. "What sort of discussion?" "Better you hear it from Mayor Thompson himself," Preston said, gesturing toward a white clapboard building down the street. "Town hall's this way. I'll escort you." As they walked, Hannah became acutely aware of the curious stares from townspeople. Canon City was larger than she'd expected, a proper frontier town with several streets of established businesses, a testament to the silver and coal mining operations that had brought prosperity to the region. "Have you come far, Miss Bartlett?" Preston asked, carrying her valise despite her protests. "St. Louis," she answered, "though I was born in Boston." "Long journey for a young woman alone." Hannah lifted her chin. "Necessity often demands courage, Mr. Xavier." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "So it does." The mayor's office was spartanly furnished but neat. Ebenezer Thompson was a rotund man with mutton chop whiskers and an air of perpetual anxiety. He practically jumped from his chair when Preston introduced Hannah. "Miss Bartlett. We weren't expecting you until next week." His gaze darted to Preston, then back to Hannah. "The letter said September 5th, Hannah replied. "Today." Yes, of course." The mayor fumbled with papers on his desk. "It's just that, well, there's been some development." Hannah's patience, already thin after days of travel and the recent attack, was wearing out. "Mr. Thompson, please speak plainly. Has the position been filled by someone else?" No, he hastened to assure her. "The position is still yours if you want it. It's just that." He looked to Preston again, seemingly for support. "It's Reverend Caldwell," Preston said quietly. "He's raised objections." "What objections could he possibly have?" "He doesn't know me," Hannah said. Mayor Thompson cleared his throat. "In your letters, Miss Bartlett, you mentioned you were the daughter of Professor Jonathan Bartlett." "Yes, my father taught natural philosophy at Washington University." The mayor and Preston exchanged glances. "It seems," Preston explained carefully, "that Reverend Caldwell is familiar with your father's published works on geological time and evolution. He's called them dangerous blasphemy." Hannah felt heat rising to her face. Her father had indeed been a proponent of Darwin's theories, which had caused him no small amount of trouble in academic circles. But to have it follow her here, to the edge of civilization. "I fail to see how my father's academic work has any bearing on my ability to teach arithmetic and grammar to children," she said stiffly. "Ordinarily, it wouldn't," Mayor Thompson said. "But Reverend Caldwell sits on the school board and he's persuasive. He's threatened to withdraw the church's financial support for the school," Preston added, "and many families attend his church. So my position is in jeopardy because of guilt by association." Hannah asked incredulously. "Not jeopardy exactly," the mayor hedged, "but there will be conditions." "Conditions. Reverend Caldwell insists that you make a public declaration renouncing your father's theories and affirming your commitment to teaching only Scripture-approved curriculum." The mayor looked miserable having to relay this. Hannah stood, anger coursing through her veins. "My father was a man of science and integrity. I will not dishonor his memory by denouncing his life's work to appease a small-minded preacher I've never even met." "Miss Bartlett, please understand our position," the mayor began, but Hannah was already at the door. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Thompson. I'll find accommodation for tonight and consider my options." Preston followed her out onto the boardwalk. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows down the main street. "I apologize for the mayor's handling of this," he said quietly. "Canon City's better than this, or at least trying to be." Hannah blinked back tears of frustration. "Where might I find lodging for the night?" "The Silver Dollar Hotel is clean and respectable." Preston pointed to a 3-story building down the street. "Mrs. Whittaker runs it. Tell her I sent you." Hannah nodded curtly, unwilling to show more vulnerability. "Thank you for your assistance today, Deputy Xavier." "Preston," he corrected gently. "And I'd like to hear your side of this if you're willing to share it over supper this evening." Hannah hesitated. His offer seemed genuine, and she was alone in a strange town with few allies. "Very well," she agreed. "Though I warn you, I'm not in the most pleasant mood for company." A smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features. "I reckon you've earned the right to be a mite disagreeable, Miss Bartlett." "Hannah," she offered in return, "and thank you again." The Silver Dollar Hotel was indeed clean and respectable, if modest. Mrs. Whittaker, a widow with silver-streaked dark hair, showed Hannah to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. "Deputy Xavier is a good man," Mrs. Whittaker commented as she helped Hannah settle in. "One of the few in these parts who'll stand up to Reverend Caldwell when needed." "You're familiar with the situation, then?" Hannah asked. Mrs. Whittaker snorted. "Everyone in town knows by now." "The Reverend made quite a show of it at Sunday service, waving your father's book around like it was written by the devil himself." Hannah sank onto the edge of the bed. "I came here to teach children, not to fight theological battles." "Sometimes we don't get to choose our battles, dear," the older woman said kindly. "For what it's worth, not everyone in town shares the Reverend's views. Canon City's growing got miners, railroad men, business folk who have seen more of the world than just Scripture." After washing away the dust of travel, Hannah changed into her one good dress, a dark blue cotton with modest lace at the collar. When she descended to the hotel's small dining room, Preston was already waiting, hat in hand, his own clothing refreshed. "You look rested," he observed as he pulled out her chair. "Appearances can be deceiving," she replied, though with less edge than before. They ordered the day's special beef stew with biscuits and for a few minutes ate in companionable silence. Hannah found herself studying Preston when he wasn't looking. He was perhaps 30, with the lean build of a man accustomed to physical work, though his manner suggested education beyond the typical frontier lawman. "Tell me about your father," Preston said eventually. Hannah set down her spoon. "He was brilliant, kind, dedicated to understanding the natural world as it is, not merely as ancient texts described it." She met his gaze directly. He believed that science and faith need not be enemies, that understanding the mechanisms of creation only deepens the wonder of it. "Sounds like a wise man." "He was." Hannah's voice softened. "He encouraged me to question, to seek knowledge. When Mother died of consumption 5 years ago, he insisted I continue my education rather than become his housekeeper. The mind is a terrible thing to waste, he always said, especially a woman's, since society gives them so few opportunities to use it. And now you're here, carrying on his legacy in your own way," Preston observed. "Trying to," Hannah corrected, "if Reverend Caldwell will allow it." Preston leaned forward. "Hiram Caldwell came to Canon City 3 years ago. Before that, we had an old circuit preacher who was content to deliver his Sunday sermon and leave folks to manage their own salvation the rest of the week. Caldwell's different, believes it's his mission to control every aspect of town morality. And the town allows this. He's got powerful friends, mining company owners, wealthy ranchers who appreciate his emphasis on order and obedience." Preston's expression darkened. "Not everyone's thrilled with his methods, but most folks keep their heads down." "And you?" Hannah asked. "Do you keep your head down, Deputy?" A slow smile spread across his face. "I've been known to raise it at inconvenient moments." Their conversation flowed easily after that, touching on books they'd read, places they'd been. Preston had fought briefly in the closing days of the Civil War as a very young man, then drifted west, working as a ranch hand before finding his place in law enforcement. He spoke of Canon City with genuine affection, despite its flaws. "It's a town in transition," he explained. "The wild days aren't quite over, but we're building something more permanent here. Schools, businesses, families putting down roots. And where do I fit in that vision?" Hannah asked softly. Before Preston could answer, the dining room door burst open, and a tall, gaunt man in clerical black stormed in, followed by 2 stern-looking elders in dark suits. "So it's true," the man said loudly. "The blasphemer's daughter has arrived." The dining room fell silent as every head turned. Hannah felt her cheeks burn but forced herself to remain seated, her back straight. Preston stood slowly. "Reverend Caldwell, this is a private dinner." "Nothing is private when it concerns the moral welfare of this community," Caldwell retorted. His cold eyes fixed on Hannah. "Miss Bartlett, I presume? Your reputation precedes you." "As does yours, Reverend," Hannah replied evenly. "Though I find it curious that a man of God would confront a stranger so publicly without the courtesy of an introduction." A muscle twitched in Caldwell's jaw. "I'll not have my flock led astray by godless teaching. Your father's theories mock the very foundation of Scripture." Hannah remained calm, though her heart raced. "My father taught people to think, Reverend, a dangerous concept for those who prefer blind obedience." Murmurs rippled through the dining room. Caldwell's face flushed dark red. "You'll not speak in such a manner to a man of God," one of the elders growled. "Gentlemen," Preston's voice cut through the tension, "this is neither the time nor place for this discussion. Miss Bartlett has traveled far today and deserves her rest." "There's only one discussion needed," Caldwell said. "Miss Bartlett will publicly renounce her father's blasphemous teachings, or she will not be welcome in the school or the church." Hannah slowly rose to her feet. I have no intention of discussing evolution or geological time with children learning their letters and sums, Reverend. But neither will I denounce a good and honest man whose only crime was seeking truth. Then you've made your choice, Caldwell declared. You are not welcome in God's house in Canon City, and I'll see to it that no decent family sends their children to be poisoned by your teaching. The words stung more than Hannah wanted to admit. Church had been her anchor after losing both parents, the one place she'd found community in her grief. That's enough, Preston said firmly, stepping between Hannah and the reverend. Miss Bartlett has been hired by the town council, not the church. The school is public property. The school receives church funding, one of the elders reminded him. Then perhaps it's time the town reconsidered that arrangement, Preston replied. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. Careful, Deputy. Your position depends on the goodwill of Canon City's leading citizens. My position depends on upholding the law fairly for all citizens, Preston corrected. Now, I suggest you gentlemen continue this discussion with the mayor tomorrow during business hours. For a moment, Hannah thought Caldwell might refuse to leave. Then, with a final glare in her direction, he turned on his heel. This isn't finished, he said over his shoulder as he departed. The dining room erupted in whispers as the door closed behind him. Mrs. Whittaker hurried over, her face creased with concern. I'm so sorry, dear. That man has no sense of propriety. Hannah sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. It seems I've brought trouble to your establishment, Mrs. Whittaker. Nonsense, the older woman said firmly. Trouble was already here wearing a clerical collar. Preston reclaimed his seat, studying Hannah with concern. Are you all right? I'm fine, she said automatically, then paused. No, that's not true. I'm angry and hurt. I came here to teach children, not to be the center of a theological controversy. You don't have to stay, Preston said quietly. No one would blame you for taking the next stage out. Hannah looked at him sharply. Is that what you think I should do? No, he answered without hesitation. I think Canon City needs more people willing to stand up to bullies, not fewer, but it won't be easy. Hannah thought of her father's voice when she'd told him of the teaching offer. The frontier needs educated women, Hannah. Go west. Build something new. She couldn't abandon that dream at the first sign of resistance. I'm staying, she said firmly, at least long enough to try. A slow smile spread across Preston's face. Good. The following morning, Hannah dressed carefully in her most professional attire, a high-necked blouse and dark skirt, and made her way to the schoolhouse at the edge of town. It was a simple one-room building with a small bell tower, surrounded by a dirt yard where children might play during recess. The door was unlocked, so she entered. Inside, rows of simple desks faced a teacher's desk on a small platform. A blackboard covered most of the front wall. It was spare but functional, exactly what she had expected. What she hadn't expected was to find Preston already there, checking the pot-bellied stove in the corner. Making sure it's in working order before the weather turns, he explained, standing as she entered. Winters get cold in Canon City. Thank you, Hannah said, setting her teaching materials on the desk. Though I'm not certain I'll be here long enough to need it. Don't lose heart yet, Preston advised. Mayor Thompson is meeting with the school board this morning. Not everyone supports Caldwell's position. Hannah began organizing her supplies. Even if the board allows me to teach, what of the parents? If they keep their children home, I'll have no students to teach. Some will follow Caldwell's lead, Preston acknowledged. Others will make up their own minds once they meet you. A knock at the open door interrupted them. A woman in her 30s stood there, holding the hand of a girl about 7 years old. Behind them were 2 more women with children of various ages. Miss Bartlett, the the first woman asked hesitantly. "I'm Mary Watson. This is my daughter Louisa. We heard you were preparing the schoolhouse today." Hannah stepped forward, extending her hand. "Yes, I'm Hannah Bartlett. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Watson. We wanted to welcome you to Canon City," Mary said, shaking Hannah's hand firmly. "And to let you know that not everyone shares Reverend Caldwell's views. My husband works for the railroad," one of the other women added. "He says Caldwell's notions would have us still believing the earth is flat." Relief washed over Hannah. "Thank you. Your support means more than I can express." "How many children will be attending?" Preston asked. The women exchanged glances. "Hard to say," Mary admitted. "The reverend has been busy this morning visiting families. But there are at least 15 children whose parents have agreed to send them when classes begin on Monday." 15, Hannah repeated. It was fewer than the 40 she had been told to expect, but it was a start. "Then I shall prepare for 15 with hope for more." Throughout the day, more families visited, some supportive, others merely curious to see the woman causing such controversy. By afternoon, Hannah had a clearer picture of her potential class. About 20 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age, with widely varying levels of previous education. Preston remained nearby, ostensibly checking the schoolhouse's security, but clearly providing a protective presence. When Hannah finally locked up for the day, he walked her back toward the hotel. 20 students isn't bad for a start," he said encouragingly. "If they all come," Hannah qualified. "Reverend Caldwell has until Sunday to convince their parents otherwise." They passed the imposing white church at the center of town. Several men were gathered on its steps, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. When they spotted Hannah and Preston, conversation ceased. "The church board," Preston murmured. "Deciding your fate, most likely." Hannah paused, studying the building with its tall steeple and polished bell. "It's a beautiful church," she said. "It saddens me that I won't be welcome inside it." Preston looked at her thoughtfully, then at the church, then back to Hannah. His expression changed, determination replacing concern. "Miss Bartlett," he said formally, loud enough for the men on the steps to hear, "would you care to attend Sunday services with me?" Hannah blinked in surprise. "I believe Reverend Caldwell made his position clear last night." "He did," Preston agreed, still speaking for their audience's benefit. "But I find myself questioning whether one man has the right to bar another soul from worship." The men on the church steps were now watching intently. Hannah realized Preston was deliberately creating a public confrontation, one that would force the community to take sides. "I would be honored to attend with you, Deputy Xavier," she said clearly. "If the house of God is truly open to all." One of the men on the steps hurried inside, presumably to inform Caldwell. Preston offered Hannah his arm, and they continued toward the hotel. "That was either very brave or very foolish," Hannah murmured when they were out of earshot. "Sometimes they're the same thing," Preston replied with a wink. "Caldwell's power comes from no one challenging him. It's time someone did. And you volunteered us for the task. Unless you'd rather not." Hannah considered it. The sensible course would be to focus on winning over the school board and parents, not antagonizing the reverend further. Yet something in her rebelled at the idea of being excluded from worship based on her father's academic work. "Sunday it is," she decided, "though I expect we'll be the least popular parishioners." Preston's smile was worth the risk. "I've never much cared for popularity." Sunday arrived clear and crisp, with the first hint of autumn in the air. Hannah wore her best dress, a deep green wool with modest trim that had been her mother's. Preston met her at the hotel, looking uncommonly formal in a black suit coat and string tie. "You clean up nicely, Deputy," Hannah observed as he offered his arm. Special occasions call for special efforts, he replied, his eyes appreciative as they took in her appearance. They were not the only ones making an effort that morning. It seemed all of Canon City had turned out for the service, the usual congregation swelled by the curious and the concerned. As Preston and Hannah approached the church, the crowd parted, whispers following in their wake. At the church steps, they found their path blocked by two stern-faced elders, the same men who had accompanied Caldwell to the hotel. "I'm afraid you can't enter, Miss Bartlett," the taller one said. "Reverend Caldwell has been very clear on this matter. On what grounds am I being denied entrance to a house of worship?" Hannah asked calmly. "This is private property," the second elder stated. "And the reverend has the right to refuse entry to anyone who threatens the spiritual well-being of the congregation." Preston stepped forward. "Is that how you interpret Christ's teaching, to turn away those who seek to worship?" "Don't presume to lecture us on Scripture, Xavier," the first elder snapped. "Your own attendance has been spotty at best." "Perhaps because I find the message inside increasingly at odds with the Savior's words," Preston replied evenly. More townspeople had gathered, watching the confrontation. Hannah saw some of the parents she'd met, along with other faces both hostile and sympathetic. This was exactly what she had hoped to avoid, becoming the center of a community division. "It's all right, Preston," she said softly. "We can go." "No, it isn't all right," he replied, his voice carrying to the crowd. "If Miss Bartlett isn't welcome in this church because she's the daughter of a man who sought to understand God's creation, then I question whether any of us truly belong here." The church doors opened, and Reverend Caldwell emerged, his tall figure imposing in his Sunday blacks. "Is there a problem, gentlemen?" "No problem, Reverend," Preston said before the elders could respond. "Just clarifying that you're refusing entry to a woman who wishes to worship because you disagree with her deceased father's academic writings." Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "I am protecting my flock from dangerous influences, Deputy. Miss Bartlett's presence would be disruptive." "The only disruption I see is coming from those who would turn away a believer from God's house," came a new voice. The crowd parted to reveal Mayor Thompson, accompanied by his wife and several other prominent citizens. "Ebenezer," Caldwell said warningly, "this is a church matter, not a town matter. When you deny entry to a citizen of Canon City, it becomes a town matter," the mayor replied with surprising firmness. "Especially one we've hired to educate our children." "The school board hasn't formally approved her appointment," one of the elders pointed out. "They did actually," the mayor countered, "by a vote of 4-3 yesterday afternoon." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Hannah hadn't been informed of this development. Caldwell's face darkened. "That decision can be reversed." "It could," the mayor agreed, "but it would require demonstrating that Miss Bartlett is unfit for the position. Being Professor Bartlett's daughter hardly qualifies as unfitness." "Her refusal to renounce her father's godless theories," Caldwell began. "Shows loyalty and integrity," Preston interrupted. "Qualities we should value in a teacher." Hannah stepped forward, addressing Caldwell directly. "Reverend, I have not come to challenge your theology or to teach evolution to children. I've come to provide education in reading, writing, arithmetic, and history. If my presence in your church troubles you so deeply, I will respect that and worship elsewhere." "There is no elsewhere in Canon City," Caldwell said dismissively. Preston's voice rang out, clear and determined. "Then I'll build her a new one." A hush fell over the crowd. Hannah turned to look at Preston, shock evident on her face. "What did you say?" Caldwell asked incredulously. "I said I'll build her a new one," Preston repeated, his gaze steady. "If this church refuses to welcome all who seek God in good faith, then perhaps Canon City needs a church that will. On what authority? Caldwell demanded. You're no preacher, Xavier. No, Preston agreed. But I own land at the edge of town, 10 acres my father left me. And in this country, a man can build what he pleases on his own property. Hannah tugged at his sleeve. Preston, you can't be serious. But the deputy's eyes never left Caldwell's. Dead serious, Reverend. You've ruled this town by fear long enough. There are good folks here who deserve better than your brand of Christianity. Caldwell's face had gone pale with fury. This is blasphemy. No, Preston replied calmly. It's democracy and frontier justice. He turned to the crowd. Any man or woman who believes worship should be open to all is welcome to help raise a new church. We'll start next Saturday. With that, he offered his arm to Hannah and turned away from the church steps. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then Mary Watson stepped away from the crowd to join them. My husband's a carpenter, she said. He'll help. Another man stepped forward. I've got timber from my mill, you can have it cost. I can donate windows, called another voice. One by one, townspeople began to voice their support, until nearly half the crowd had aligned themselves with Preston's impromptu building project. Hannah could scarcely believe what was happening, what Preston had set in motion with a single declaration. As they walked away from the church, she finally found her voice. Have you completely lost your mind? She whispered fiercely. Building a church? You're not a minister. We don't have resources or details, Preston said with a confidence she found both maddening and oddly reassuring. What matters is that Caldwell now knows he doesn't speak for everyone in Canon City. You've made an enemy today, Hannah warned. I made that enemy the moment I stood with you, Preston replied, and I don't regret it. The crowd that had followed them stopped at the town square. Preston turned to address them. I appreciate your support, friends. Let's meet Wednesday evening at the Silver Dollar to discuss plans. For today, I suggest we all find our own ways to worship, whether that's in nature, in our homes, or elsewhere. As the crowd dispersed, Hannah and Preston continued toward the hotel. You've started something that can't easily be stopped, Hannah said. A church rivalry will divide this town. The town is already divided, Preston countered. Caldwell's influence has seen to that. At least now there's an alternative to his narrow vision. And who will lead this new church? You, Preston laughed. Good Lord, no, I'm no preacher. But I know an old army chaplain who settled near Denver, Marcus Jenkins. He's a thoughtful man, educated but down to earth. Believes faith and reason can coexist. And you think he'd come to Canon City? For the chance to build something new, I think he might. Preston looked at her curiously. Does the idea trouble you? Hannah considered the question seriously. I came here to teach, not to be at the center of a religious schism, but I can't deny that the idea of a more inclusive church appeals to me. Then trust that we're doing the right thing, Preston said, even if the path isn't clear yet. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Monday morning saw Hannah welcome 17 students to the schoolhouse, fewer than hoped, but a respectable number given the circumstances. By Wednesday, the number had grown to 22, as some parents who had initially kept their children home changed their minds after hearing positive reports from neighbors. Teaching such a diverse group was challenging but rewarding. Hannah organized the students by ability rather than age, creating flexible groupings that allowed each child to progress at their own pace. By Friday, she had begun to feel that she might succeed in Canon City after all. Meanwhile, Preston's church project had taken on a life of its own. Wednesday's meeting at the Silver Dollar had drawn over 30 adults, representing nearly a quarter of the town's families. Plans were drawn, committees formed, and a site selected on Preston's land, a gentle rise overlooking the town, accessible by a well-traveled road. Saturday dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for breaking ground. Hannah arrived at the site to find over 40 people already gathered, including many of her students and their parents. Men with shovels and axes were marking the building site, while women had set up tables laden with food for the workers. Preston greeted her with a wide smile. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing to the activity around them. "I think you've awakened something in this town," Hannah replied honestly. "Something powerful." "Not me," Preston corrected. "Us. This is happening because you stood your ground." Before Hannah could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. A wagon was coming up the road, followed by 3 riders on horseback. As they drew closer, Hannah recognized Mayor Thompson in the wagon, accompanied by an older man with a trimmed white beard. The riders included 2 of the town councilmen who had supported Hannah's teaching appointment. Preston went to meet them, helping the older man down from the wagon. "Hannah," he called, "come meet Reverend Marcus Jenkins." She approached somewhat shyly. The Reverend was tall and spare, with keen blue eyes that studied her thoughtfully. "Miss Bartlett," he said, taking her hand. "I've heard quite a story about you from my friend Preston here." "I fear much of it has been exaggerated," Hannah replied. Jenkins chuckled. "Perhaps, but I recognize the name Bartlett. Your father's monograph on fossil formations in the Mississippi Valley was quite enlightening." Hannah's eyes widened. "You've read my father's work." "Indeed. A thinking man's faith requires engaging with the world as it is, not merely as we wish it to be." The Reverend looked around at the bustling worksite. "Now, Preston tells me you're in need of a minister who doesn't believe science is the enemy of God." "We are," Hannah confirmed, warming to the old chaplain immediately. "Though I never imagined being involved in founding a church." "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Jenkins said with a wink. "And sometimes he needs a little help from stubborn deputies and schoolteachers." With Reverend Jenkins's arrival, the project gained new legitimacy. Mayor Thompson, who had been cautiously supportive, now openly endorsed the effort, bringing additional volunteers and resources. By midday, the foundation had been staked out and men were digging post holes for the frame. Hannah found herself working alongside Mary Watson, cutting fabric for temporary curtains that would serve until proper windows could be installed. "I've never seen anything like this," Mary commented, watching the coordinated activity. "So many people coming together so quickly." "It's remarkable," Hannah agreed, "though I can't help feeling responsible for the division in your community." Mary snorted. "The division was already there, honey. Caldwell's been pushing people away for years with his rigid ways. This is just the first time anyone's offered an alternative. Still, I never intended to be the catalyst for such controversy." "Sometimes the most important changes come from unexpected places," Mary said wisely. "My Louisa adores you, by the way. Says you're the first teacher who doesn't treat her like she's slow just because she's quiet." Hannah smiled, touched by the compliment. "Louisa is thoughtful, not slow." She considers her answers carefully before speaking, a rare quality in one so young. As they worked, Hannah kept finding her gaze drawn to Preston, who seemed to be everywhere at once, helping dig foundation trenches, unloading lumber from wagons, conferring with the master carpenter about the building design. His enthusiasm was infectious, his leadership natural and unforced. "He's a good man," Mary observed, following Hannah's gaze. "Been sweet on you since you arrived, if you haven't noticed." Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes you just know," Mary replied with a knowing smile. "My Henry and I courted for all of 2 weeks before we married. That was 12 years and 5 children ago." "Preston and I aren't courting," Hannah protested. Mary raised an eyebrow. "A man doesn't build a church for just anyone, Miss Bartlett." Before Hannah could formulate a response, a commotion at the road drew everyone's attention. Reverend Caldwell had arrived with several of his church elders, all on horseback. The work gradually ceased as people turned to watch the confrontation that seemed inevitable. Preston and Mayor Thompson walked out to meet them, with Reverend Jenkins following at a more measured pace. "This is private property, Reverend Caldwell," Preston called. "You're welcome to observe, but I'll ask you to keep the peace." Caldwell remained mounted, looking down at them with undisguised contempt. "I've come to see this sacrilege for myself," he announced loudly. "A false church built on sand, led by a heretic and a lawman who barely darkens a church door." "Your concern for our spiritual welfare is noted," Preston replied evenly. "But as you can see, we have work to do." "This abomination will never be consecrated," Caldwell declared. "No true Christian will worship here." Reverend Jenkins stepped forward, his voice carrying despite his age. "I believe that's for God to judge, Brother Caldwell, not you or me. As for consecration, the ground is made holy by the intentions of those who gather upon it." Caldwell's eyes narrowed as he regarded Jenkins. "And who might you be?" "Marcus Jenkins, late of the 10th Cavalry Chaplaincy, more recently of the Denver Presbyterian Mission." The old minister's posture straightened, revealing the military bearing that years of civilian life hadn't erased. "I've accepted the call to minister to this congregation." "Congregation?" Caldwell scoffed. "A collection of malcontents and a woman who carries the taint of her father's blasphemy." Hannah had heard enough. She set aside her sewing and walked to join Preston and the others. "My father sought truth through science, Reverend Caldwell," she said clearly. "Just as I seek to bring knowledge to my students. Neither pursuit threatens true faith, only blind dogma." A murmur of approval ran through the workers. Caldwell's face darkened with anger. "You've made your choice, Xavier," he said, ignoring Hannah entirely. "The town council will hear about this sedition." "Half the town council is already here, helping," Mayor Thompson pointed out dryly. "And building a church is hardly sedition." Caldwell's gaze swept over the assembled workers, many of whom had been his parishioners until recently. "Remember this day," he said ominously, "when you chose to follow false prophets rather than God's appointed messenger." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his companions following. "Well," Reverend Jenkins said into the silence that followed, "it seems I've arrived just in time for the excitement." A ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension, and gradually the work resumed. Hannah found herself helping to serve the midday meal, making sure every worker received food and water. The atmosphere, despite Caldwell's visit, remained positive, even jubilant. What had begun as Preston's impulsive stand against injustice was becoming a genuine community effort. As evening approached, the progress was remarkable. The foundation posts were set, floor joists in place, and wall framing had begun to rise against the darkening sky. When Preston finally called a halt to the day's work, there was a tangible sense of accomplishment among the volunteers. "We'll continue next Saturday," he announced. "And in the meantime, Reverend Jenkins has agreed to hold service here tomorrow morning, weather permitting. Bring blankets to sit on and your own hymnals if you have them." As the crowd dispersed, Hannah helped clean up the remains of the day's meals. Preston joined her, collecting empty plates. "Thank you for your help today," he said. "You didn't have to support this madness." Hannah smiled. "It may have started as madness, but I think it's becoming something beautiful." She gestured to the partially framed building silhouetted against the sunset. You've given people something to believe in, a way to express their faith that aligns with their values. We've done that, Preston corrected. I may have spoken the words, but you were the catalyst. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes. When the last of the supplies had been packed away, Preston offered to walk Hannah back to town. The evening was cool, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue above them. They walked slowly, both tired from the day's exertions but reluctant for it to end. "Reverend Jenkins is remarkable," Hannah commented. "I wasn't expecting someone so progressive." "The war changed him," Preston explained. "Seeing men of all faiths fight and die together gave him a broader perspective on what really matters." "Will he stay in Canon City permanently?" "If things go well, yes. He's been looking for a place to settle, somewhere he can build something meaningful in his later years." Hannah considered this. "And you? Is this meaningful to you, or just a way to oppose Caldwell?" Preston stopped walking, turning to face her in the gathering dusk. "It started as defiance," he admitted, "but it's become something more. When I saw how easily Caldwell would exclude you, someone seeking only to teach and worship in peace, something broke inside me. I couldn't stand by anymore." "That's a powerful motivation for building a church," Hannah observed. "It wasn't just about a church," Preston said quietly. "It was about you." The air between them seemed to still. Hannah's heart quickened as Preston took a step closer. "I know we've only known each other a short time," he continued, his voice low and earnest, "but I feel as though I've been waiting for someone like you my whole life. Someone with courage and conviction, someone who stands her ground even when it would be easier to retreat." "Preston," Hannah whispered, not trusting her voice for more. "I'm not asking for promises," he said quickly. "It's too soon for that. But I want you to know that whatever happens with the church, with the school, my feelings for you are real." Hannah studied his face in the fading light, the honesty in his eyes, the vulnerability beneath his strength. In the weeks since her arrival in Canon City, this man had defended her, supported her, and now built her a church. Not out of pity or obligation, but because he saw something in her worth fighting for. Slowly, she reached up to touch his cheek. "I feel it too," she admitted. "This connection between us, it frightens me a little how quickly it's happened." Preston covered her hand with his own. "We can take it slowly." "Not too slowly," Hannah murmured, and rising on her toes, she pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Preston's arms came around her. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Well," Preston said, a smile spreading across his face, "I certainly wasn't expecting that." Hannah laughed softly. "Neither was I, but I don't regret it." They continued their walk back to town, hands entwined, discussing plans for the following day's service. Despite the incomplete state of the building, there was something fitting about worshiping under open rafters, with only the framework of walls to shelter them. A church in becoming, just like the community it would serve. Sunday's service exceeded all expectations. Over 60 people gathered on the hilltop, seated on blankets or makeshift benches fashioned from planks and sawhorses. Reverend Jenkins conducted a simple but moving service, speaking about faith that embraces questions rather than fearing them. "God gave us minds to think and hearts to feel," he told the assembled congregation. "To ignore either is to dishonor the Creator who made us complex and curious creatures." Hannah, seated beside Preston, felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what worship should be: honest, inclusive, grounded in love rather than fear. When Jenkins invited those gathered to join in communion, nearly everyone participated, including some who admitted they had never felt worthy in Caldwell's church. The following weeks established a rhythm to Hannah's life in Canon City. Weekdays were devoted to teaching, as her student numbers continued to grow, eventually reaching 35 children from diverse backgrounds. Wednesdays and Saturdays were for church building, with teams of volunteers working steadily to complete the structure before winter set in. Sundays brought worship, first outdoors, then within the partially enclosed building as walls rose and a roof was added. Through it all, her relationship with Preston deepened. They took meals together regularly, enjoyed long walks on Sunday afternoons, and found countless opportunities to learn about each other's pasts and dreams for the future. Canon City noticed their courtship. Of course, small towns always did, but the reaction was largely positive, especially among those who had aligned themselves with the new church. Caldwell made several attempts to undermine their efforts. He petitioned the town council to revoke Hannah's teaching position, claiming she was teaching Darwinism to the children. When parents testified otherwise, he switched tactics, suggesting that Preston was neglecting his duties as deputy to focus on the church project. Sheriff Collins dismissed these complaints, pointing out that crime in Canon City had actually decreased in recent months. By late October, the church building, now officially named Grace Community Church, was nearly complete. Its white clapboard siding gleamed in the autumn sunlight, and the simple bell tower lacked only the bell itself, which was being cast in Denver. Inside, plain wooden pews provided seating for up to 100 worshipers, and a modest pulpit stood at the front. There were no fancy stained glass windows or ornate decorations, just clean lines and natural light streaming through clear glass. "It's beautiful," Hannah said, standing in the center aisle after the Saturday work crew had departed. "Simple but dignified." Preston, who had been securing tools in the small storage room, came to stand beside her. "More beautiful with you in it." She leaned against him, enjoying the solid warmth of his presence. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Caldwell had simply let me into his church that first Sunday?" "Sometimes," Preston admitted. "But then I remind myself that his rejection led to all of this, not just the building, but the community that's formed around it. And us." Hannah nodded. Their courtship had progressed steadily, with Preston now openly speaking of marriage, though no formal proposal had yet been made. Hannah found herself eager for that step, having discovered in Preston a partner who valued her mind as much as her heart. "Tomorrow's service will be special," Preston said, changing the subject. "The first in the completed sanctuary." "Completed except for the bell," Hannah reminded him. "That arrives next week, but otherwise we're ready." Pride colored his voice, and rightfully so. He had been the driving force behind the project, contributing not just his land but countless hours of labor and most of his savings. As they prepared to leave, a sound at the entrance caught their attention. Reverend Jenkins entered, accompanied by a young couple Hannah didn't recognize. "Ah, there you are," Jenkins called. "I hoped I might find you here. These good folks have a request that won't wait until tomorrow." The couple approached shyly. The woman was visibly pregnant, perhaps 7 months along, while the man had the weathered look of someone who worked outdoors. "Miss Bartlett, Deputy Xavier," the man said, removing his hat. "I'm Thomas Green, and this is my wife Sarah. We've just arrived from Missouri, heading to my brother's ranch outside town." "Welcome to Canon City," Preston said, shaking his hand. "How can we help you?" Sarah Green spoke up, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "We need to be married properly, sir. We had a camp ceremony with a traveling preacher 6 months ago, but he wasn't properly ordained, we later found out. With the baby coming," Thomas added, "we want to make sure everything's legal and proper. We tried the church in town, but the reverend there—" "He hesitated, refused to help you," Hannah guessed. Sarah nodded, eyes downcast. "He said our current state was living in sin, and we'd need to separate for a month of repentance before he'd marry us." "Which we can't do," Thomas said firmly. Sarah needs me now, with the baby coming and winter approaching. Reverend Jenkins cleared his throat. I've explained that I'm authorized to perform legal marriages and that Grace Church would welcome them. But I wanted to check if it would be appropriate to use the building tonight, before tomorrow's dedication. Preston and Hannah exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. I think it would be perfect, Hannah said. What better way to consecrate a new church than with a ceremony celebrating love and commitment? Preston nodded in agreement. The building is ready, and I can't think of a better first official act for Grace Church. Relief washed over the young couple's faces. Thank you, Sarah said, tears welling in her eyes. We've been so worried. No more worry, Reverend Jenkins assured her. We'll make this right tonight. Deputy Xavier, perhaps you could gather a few witnesses. A proper wedding needs witnesses. I know just who to ask, Preston replied, already moving toward the door. Give me 30 minutes. True to his word, Preston returned with Mayor and Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Whittaker from the hotel, and Mary Watson and her husband. Each brought small contributions to make the occasion: special flowers from Mrs. Thompson's garden, candles from Mrs. Whittaker, and a small cake Mary had quickly prepared. As dusk fell, the church was illuminated with dozens of candles, creating a warm, golden glow. Hannah helped Sarah arrange her hair and straighten her best dress, while Preston and Henry Watson spoke with Thomas, offering reassurance and the traditional pre-wedding advice. The ceremony itself was brief but moving. Reverend Jenkins spoke about love's resilience and the courage it takes to build a life together. As Thomas and Sarah exchanged vows, Hannah found herself watching Preston, who stood as a witness beside Thomas. When he caught her gaze, the look they shared held promises of their own. After the newlyweds had been congratulated and the small celebration wound down, Preston walked Hannah back to the hotel as had become their custom. The October night was crisp, stars brilliant in the clear mountain sky. That was perfect, Hannah said, still moved by the evening's events. Their first child will be born with parents properly wed, thanks to you. Thanks to us, Preston corrected. None of this would have happened if you hadn't stood your ground against Caldwell. They reached the hotel, but instead of saying goodnight at the door as usual, Preston took her hand. Walk with me a little longer. There's something I want to show you. Curious, Hannah agreed. Preston led her back toward the main street, then down a side lane she hadn't fully explored. They stopped before a small house set back from the road, a neat cottage with a front porch and recently painted white trim. Whose home is this? Hannah asked. No one's at present, Preston replied. It belonged to old Mrs. Simmons, who passed last spring. Her son in Denver finally decided to sell it. He produced a key from his pocket. Would you like to see inside? Intrigued, Hannah nodded. Preston lit a lamp just inside the door, revealing a cozy interior, a front parlor with a stone fireplace, a dining area, and doors leading to what she presumed were bedrooms. It's lovely, Hannah said, admiring the built-in bookshelves beside the fireplace. Whoever buys it will be fortunate. I bought it, Preston said quietly. Last week when the deed was finalized. Hannah turned to him in surprise. But you have rooms above the deputy's office. Those rooms suited a single man just fine, Preston said, setting the lamp on a small table. But I've been thinking about my future lately, about what I want. He took both her hands in his expression serious yet tender. Hannah Bartlett, these past 2 months have shown me what kind of woman you are: brave, principled, compassionate. You've transformed this town simply by refusing to be less than who you are. Hannah's heart quickened as she realized what was happening. Preston, I love you, he said simply. I want to build a life with you, not just a church or a school, but a home, our home. He gestured to the cottage around them. "If you'll have me." Tears blurred Hannah's vision as joy welled within her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll have you, Preston Xavier. I love you too." His smile was radiant as he drew her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. The next morning dawned bright and clear for the official dedication of Grace Community Church. Word of the previous night's wedding had spread through town, bringing additional curious attendees to the service. The sanctuary was filled to capacity, with latecomers standing at the back. Reverend Jenkins delivered a powerful sermon about new beginnings and communities built on acceptance rather than exclusion. When he invited Preston and Hannah forward to be recognized for their roles in creating the church, the congregation rose in a standing ovation. These two remarkable people remind us that faith is not merely what we profess, but what we do, Jenkins declared. They saw injustice and did not turn away. They envisioned something better and worked to make it real. After the service, as people mingled and shared refreshments outside, Hannah and Preston announced their engagement. The news was met with delighted congratulations from their friends and supporters. "When's the wedding?" Mary Watson asked excitedly. Preston looked to Hannah, who smiled. "Spring," she answered, "when the wildflowers bloom on the hillside." "A perfect time for new beginnings," Reverend Jenkins approved. The months that followed brought both challenges and joys. Winter descended on Canon City, bringing snow and bitter cold that tested the new church building and found it sturdy. The school continued to thrive under Hannah's guidance, with even some families from Caldwell's congregation eventually sending their children to her for education. Caldwell himself remained hostile, but his influence gradually waned as more townspeople recognized the positive changes Hannah and Preston had brought to Canon City. By spring, even some of his former elders had begun attending services at Grace Church, drawn by Reverend Jenkins's more inclusive theology and warm community. April brought the wildflowers Preston had promised, carpeting the hillside around Grace Church in a riot of color. On the last Saturday of the month, with the mountains still snow-capped against a brilliant blue sky, Hannah Bartlett became Hannah Xavier in a ceremony that drew nearly the entire town. She wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by Mrs. Whittaker and Mary Watson. Preston, resplendent in a new suit, waited for her at the altar with Reverend Jenkins, his face lighting up as she walked down the aisle on Mayor Thompson's arm. Their vows were personal and heartfelt, speaking of partnership, respect, and enduring love. When Jenkins pronounced them husband and wife, the bell in the tower rang out for the first time, its clear tones echoing across Canon City as a symbol of the new community they had helped to build. The celebration continued well into the evening at the town hall, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the county. Even Sheriff Collins, who generally stayed neutral in town disputes, made a point of congratulating the couple and presenting them with a finely crafted clock for their new home. "Never thought I'd see the day when Canon City had two churches and was better for it," he commented to Preston. "You've done good work here, Deputy. Both of you have." As twilight deepened into night, Preston and Hannah slipped away to their cottage, now fully furnished and waiting to begin its life as their home. On the porch, Preston paused, lifting Hannah into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Home," Hannah repeated softly, the word filled with all the meaning they had created together. "It's perfect." Inside, a fire had been lit in the grate by thoughtful friends, filling the cottage with warmth and dancing light. Preston set Hannah gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. "Are you happy?" he asked, searching her face. Completely, she answered truthfully. I came to Canon City looking for a fresh start, but I found so much more purpose, community, love. She touched his face tenderly. I found you. And I found the woman I didn't even know I was waiting for, Preston replied. The woman brave enough to stand her ground and change a town. We changed it together, Hannah corrected, and we're just beginning. Their kiss sealed the promise of that beginning of a life built on mutual respect and shared purpose, of a love that had flourished in the face of opposition and would continue to grow in the years ahead. 5 years later, Grace Community Church had expanded to accommodate its growing congregation. A small addition housed Sunday school classes, where Hannah still taught when not busy with the town school, which had also grown to require 2 full-time teachers. Preston had been elected sheriff after Collins retired, a position that allowed him to continue working for justice while spending more evenings at home with Hannah and their children, 4-year-old Jonathan and 2-year-old Elizabeth. Their cottage had gained an extra bedroom and a larger kitchen, but remained the warm, welcoming haven they had created together. Reverend Caldwell had eventually left Canon City for a position in Denver, replaced by a younger minister with a more moderate approach. The two churches now coexisted peacefully, occasionally even cooperating on community projects. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Preston surprised Hannah with a picnic on the hillside where they had built the church. As they watched their children play among the wildflowers, Hannah rested her head on her husband's shoulder. Did you ever imagine that first Sunday when Caldwell refused to let me enter that we would end up here? She asked. Preston's arm tightened around her. Not the details, he admitted. But I knew even then that you were worth fighting for, worth building a church for if that's what it took. Hannah smiled, remembering the decisive moment when he had declared, "Then I'll build her a new one." Simple words that had changed everything. "I'm glad you did," she said softly. "So am I," Preston replied, leaning down to kiss his wife as their children's laughter echoed across the hillside, the sweetest music in a story that had begun with rejection but flourished into acceptance, love, and a community transformed by the courage of 2 hearts unwilling to be divided.